The month of love. With Valentine's Day so close, it seems wrong to talk about anything else. So, for this week's GPA video, it's Westy here, your director of theater, to talk about romance through the ages. In theater, love is an enduring theme. There are so many different styles of theater and ways that they've tried to represent love on the stage. So today I'm going to have a bit of an informational video for you going over the ways that different styles of theater have represented romance on the stage. Of course, we're going to be focusing on Western theater practices, as that is what I know most about, being, well, quite Western myself. If you have any information about other styles of theater from other places in the world and how they represent love, I would absolutely love to hear it. Comment down below. As with all things Western theater, it started with the Greeks. It's interesting to think about love in ancient Greek theater because ancient Greek performers were always men. Even in female roles, they were always men, and they always wore masks covering their faces. Alongside the main characters, you would also have a chorus commenting on what was happening. In tragedies, there was always a sad ending. Men were punished by the gods, and often their loved ones suffered for it. Love was something to be lost in the ancient Greek tragedies. The comedies, however, were satires of life, often very political, with some kind of commentary to make. And they also were usually very graphic and extremely bawdy. That means they were very, very sexual. So the depictions of love on stage were often quite graphic. We'll leave it at that. Even when the ancient Greeks did start to demonstrate a sort of empathy towards the female condition, the dramatic poets in classical Athens still reinforced sexual stereotyping of women, and they viewed them as irrational creatures in need of protection from themselves and from others. Or women would become this satirized, irrational beast who would cause all sorts of problems. An example of an ancient Greek depiction of women and love comes from the comedy Lysistrata, one of my favorite ancient Greek plays. It's a comic account of a woman's attempt to end the Peloponnesian Wars by denying all men of the land any sex. This one woman, Lysistrata, gets all of the other women on her side, and they all refuse to have sex with any of the men, because obviously sex was the only thing men truly and deeply desired. So in order to stop an entire war, the women just say, hey, no more sex for you until you stop fighting each other. It's a very funny comedy, though of course, it is interesting to think that all of the women in this play were being played by men. Think of that what you will. Long after the ancient Greeks, theater fell for a while into what people often call the Dark Ages. Throughout the Middle Ages, it became very common to reenact Bible stories, usually as part of religious festivals at various points throughout the year. As Christianity became more popular, theater became seen as immoral. It was sinful, and they tried to stamp it out. When theater did make that comeback, it was in the form of religious morality tales, which means there was usually no room for romantic or sexual love, unless, of course, it was the love of Jesus, or some other love that's depicted in the biblical stories that they would place on stage. Following the Dark Ages, when theater started to become more popular again, started to become more accepted, in places like Italy, there became these traveling theatrical troupes, which led to commedia dell'arte. These Italian theater troupes performed with stock scenarios and stock characters. Many of these scenarios were centered around the young lovers, often named Isabella and Figaro, or some similar combination of names. Notably, the two characters of the young lovers did not wear masks, while most of the other characters did. The young lovers were, well, young, beautiful, and naive. Their love made them dumb and caused trouble even more often than it caused happiness. The two of them would do anything to end up together. And most of the scenarios involved, well, something stopping the young lovers from being together. This obstacle to their love was often an old male character who would be lusting over the pretty young girl, and therefore preventing the young lovers from getting together, sometimes even to the extent of trying to have the male young lover killed. So we see a very exaggerated form of love here. Yes, love is at the center of the plot, and it's something important, but it is just as likely to cause problems as it is to be something to celebrate. We all know and love Shakespeare. Well, I hope you love him. I certainly do. In Elizabethan love stories, we see a lot of inspiration taken from Commedia dell'arte, and we do see love as the center of many different plots. Whether this love is causing problems or eventually causing happiness. That often depended on whether the play you were watching was a comedy or a tragedy. There's Romeo and Juliet, a tragic love story where the two young lovers, well, through a series of misunderstandings, end up both committing suicide. We also see Othello and Desdemona in another tragedy, where Othello is driven madly jealous because of his love for Desdemona and the villain of the play pulling tricks on him. Othello eventually ends up killing Desdemona, despite the fact that he loves her so much. On the side of comedy, in a play like Much Ado About Nothing, we have Benedict and Beatrice, who are deeply in love with each other, but absolutely refuse to admit it for most of the play, which leads to a lot of very comic scenarios. In the Elizabethan love stories, the representations of love are more varied, but they're very much over-dramatized. From one extreme to the other, we see love full of jealousy as the cause of tragedy, or love that's the source of humor, as both parties act irrationally, driven by this strong emotion. In the 17th century, over in France, opera finally began to bring women into theater. And finally, we started to see women on stage. The English king, who at the time was exiled over in France, ended up bringing the practice back to England when he got restored to the throne. Over in France, he was like, hey, it's really cool that there are women on these stages. So when he came back, and it was the beginning of the English Restoration period, this king decided to introduce female actors onto the stage. Interestingly, though, the female actors were not just in female roles. Suddenly, the impersonation of the opposite sex went both ways. Men would still be playing women sometimes, but women would also sometimes be playing men, which certainly had an impact on some of the love stories being told at the time. Love continued to be a strong theme in theater throughout the ages. In the Victorian era, we saw burlesque theater, which was flashy, colorful, funny, and very sexy, very sexualized. Women were breaking free from many different restrictive social expectations that were placed on them. And so in these Victorian burlesque theater pieces, we started seeing women who were pursuing sexual relationships with lust, no longer just dainty girls dreaming of finding true love, a more Juliet-style interpretation of love. No, we were seeing women in traditionally masculine roles going after their objects of desire. We see the aesthetic ideal of burlesque theater represented, of course interpreted through a modern lens, in the movie musical Moulin Rouge. That movie emphasizes how, at the time, love was seen as a means of achieving freedom. Beauty, freedom, and love were at the top of everyone's minds. In the art world, it's what everyone was striving to achieve. So we can see how this burlesque ideals went hand in hand with, well, the romantics and melodrama, like I talked about in my previous video. Everything was over the top and strictly codified, but love was everything. It was the answer to all problems. Though it caused some problems, it was always the solution in the end of these very black and white stories. Contrasting the burlesque theater, a lot of melodrama and romantic plays showed women as good, pure, and innocent, while men were pious, chivalrous heroes. Love was at the center of every plot, as these men rescued their dear lovers from evil, villainous clutches. Love was a saving grace, though the depictions of it were still very much over-dramatized. As I talked about in my video on melodrama, when they were portraying love, it was all of the dramatic motions where they moved their hands and their bodies very, well, passionately. Love was depicted as one of the most passionate emotions to possibly exist. Moving into the 19th century, there was a rise of realism. Theater started trying to reflect real life with all its struggles and quirks. It depicted oftentimes the brutal realities of working class life. So while there was love in some of these plays, it was meant as a means of expressing a message. Even on the side of comedy, they were witty social commentaries by the likes of Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw. The love in these comedies, though a source of humor and oftentimes happiness, it still fit into trying to express a message. George Bernard Shaw wrote a play called Pygmalion, which is based on a Greek myth about a guy named Pygmalion who sculpted a sculpture so beautiful that he fell in love with it. Shaw's play, Pygmalion, well, the plot might seem quite familiar to you if you've ever seen the movie musical My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady is a direct adaptation into musical form of Shaw's play. In this play, the love is between a poor flower girl named Eliza Doolittle and phonetics professor Henry Higgins, who decides to take this girl and change the way she speaks, the way she lives, and help her move into an upper class, eventually falling in love along the way. The love between the two of them as it develops is a commentary, like the whole play, on social classes, and the fact that social classes weren't exactly as innate or real as people used to believe. As time moved on, we started focusing more on television and film than live theater. As cameras improved, we fell in love with close-up shots of actors. And these close-up shots demand minimal, naturalistic acting. Love is still a driving force in many stories, and it is depicted in a large variety of forms. We see shows like You, where love, a twisted, perverted form of love, drives a man to stalk a woman. We see love at the heart of comedies like Modern Family. These depictions of love vary greatly between the different genres that we see in television and film, though all of them do favor this more subtle, naturalistic style that looks good to us on these close-up camera shots. It will be really interesting to see in many years from now how people look back and find the patterns of how we currently depict love in the media that we create and consume. It's hard to see the patterns while you're living in them. So I'm definitely curious to see how things go in many years' time and see what patterns can be traced in the things that we're consuming today. All I know is that whatever comes, just like everything that's happened in the past, love, romantic, sexual, platonic, familial, love will continue to be at the center of stories that are told, just like the various forms of love are really, in one way or another, at the center of all of our lives. Thank you for watching the video today. Nice little history lesson, I suppose, a bit less interactive, but we do have our live session coming up soon on February 24th. You can join all of us on our Discord channel, link down below, in order to come and play some games, do a dance, sing a song with us. It will continue to be on the theme of romance and love, and it's going to be a really great time. So I do highly encourage you all to come out and join us then. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Well, guess I'll see you next time. Bye!